I was recently reading about Operation Desert Storm. I was a kid when it happened, so I wanted to find out a little bit more about it. So one interesting thing about Operation Desert Storm was the feint. So the coalition forces, which included the United States and many others, what we did was we pretended as if we were going to attack Iraq from the west. And so lots of energy and effort was put into that game of make-believe, basically. Military operations, fake communications, even some maneuvers. And so Saddam Hussein thought that the coalition forces were going to come at him from the west. So he put all of his effort, I guess you could say, into defending that border. Well, guess what? That's not where the real attack came from. The real attack came from the east. And the entire operation of the ground battle lasted about 100 hours. Take that in for a second. 100 hours is not long for a war. It was all due to the feint. Now, as you can imagine, because I'm a Bible teacher, I'm going to use this as an illustration. I think this illustrates something that's going on in free grace. So in free grace circles, we have spent years, I would say an entire generation, 40 years, defending certain verses as if they need to be defended, rather than seeing them for what I think they might actually be. So let me give you kind of an elucidation of what I'm talking about. So we often talk about what we call problem passages or tough texts or twisted scriptures. And the way that free grace people approach those verses is to treat them as if they're really, really difficult and that we only ought to take a defensive position about them and then avoid them all the rest of the time. Like, I don't want to talk about James 2 for any purpose except to tell you what it doesn't say. You know, and so that's the approach that I've seen over and over in free grace circles, is that we are really, really focused on telling you why James 2 isn't about how you can either lose your salvation or learn you never had it in the first place. That's our incredible focus on verses like that in Matthew 7 and some in Hebrews, is we focus so strongly on what it's not saying about salvation that I think we miss these really important verses for discipleship success. So in a war, the places, the territories that are most contested, usually that's because they are the most important. And I began to think, what if these so-called problem passages are actually some of the most important verses for helping us understand how to have successful discipleship? Like, what if my discipleship in that process, apart from my salvation is settled, but in my discipleship, what if I really needed to focus on James chapter 2 or Matthew 7 or Hebrews 6 or 11? I mean, what if that was something that I really needed to do, but because I'm so focused on putting the defense in, putting the defensive walls up, that I completely missed the fact that for my discipleship success, this is a vital verse. So I'm beginning the process of thinking through how we might shift the narrative on how we talk about problem passages, how we might shift the strategy when we think about these tough texts. And instead of thinking of them that way, beginning to think of them as vital assets for allowing us discipleship success. So here's why I'm bringing this up. I'm hoping you can help. What I'm interested in is hearing from you about verses in kind of that list that that have been valuable to you on a discipleship from a discipleship perspective. I want to hear from you how those verses that we often just focus on why they're not a contradiction to faith alone. I want to hear from you about how those have helped you in your daily living. Okay. So hear me here. I'm not asking for new ways to defend these verses from lordship salvation. I'm asking, how have they been valuable to you in your daily discipleship? If we can begin to do this, here's the vision. If we can begin to do this, I think we can begin to really combat something that I think is a strategic feint. I think that our enemy, Satan, wants to keep us bickering and fighting about these verses on one particular subject so that we don't focus on them for what they were actually intended for, which is to make us dangerous disciples, to borrow a term from one of my friends. That's my thoughts for the day. Hope to hear from you. Thanks.